All right.
Okay, so here we are. Where are we? Got 7 o'clock in the UK in the morning. The Marine Surveying International Fest 2018 continues. We are coming into the final straight now, and I'm delighted to welcome online Captain Ruchin Dayal, someone who I regard as very much a friend of the Institute and also as a personal friend. Ruchin, delighted to have you with us today, and I know you are talking about a subject that is particularly dear to your heart, the IMSBC Code 2018 and iron ore fines. What I would say is I've spent some time out with you in Goa, and I've seen the work that you are doing in this area with your laboratory, and it's just, I think, really heartwarming to see that a group of surveyors within your organisation take extreme care with this particular cargo, and I'm fascinated to hear how you're going to update this presentation. So without further ado, the next 50 minutes are yours, Ruchin.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you for the introduction. And once again, let me wish everybody a happy Diwali. And let me try and get on and do justice to the IMSBC Code. So before we really get into the presentation, why are we doing this? Because iron ore fines and the code, maybe last year or so, is becoming a jaded topic. There was so much written about this in the last 10 years. But lately, we have not been hearing much about this, about the code or the iron ore fines or what's happening with it. Well, have a look at this. 10 years, 209 lives were lost in 59 bulk losses, out of which the number of deaths due to liquefaction alone, just liquefaction, 111. So really, liquefaction is the biggest killer where the dry bulk industry is concerned. So whatever little we do is still extremely little where the code and the loading of iron ore fines or other concentrate cargo is concerned. Things are changing, cargoes are changing, and we need to move on. All right, so these are few of the cases which I could, chronologically update, and I've added the Emerald Star and the Stellar Daisy. Of course, the Stellar Daisy may be eventually attributed to structural loss, but the others, yes, they've all been nickel ore or iron ore, with the Black Rose and Asian Forest, of course, in New Mangalore and on the east coast of India. So, well, I think brave of you guys to sit through this presentation, but important, and I think extremely important that we give the kind of necessary importance to this subject. I have tried to divide the presentation into 3 parts. The first will essentially be a little bit of the history as to why it has come into being, what is the code, who uses it, and apologies for those who are already used to this and may find it a bit rudimentary. The second is perhaps a little technical as to what are the changes and why are they contentious, how are we understanding the change and handling it. And the last part of the presentation, perhaps the most important, is who is the competent authority and how is our role eventually going to turn out as things are so dynamically changing every day. All right, so here it is. I hope you will have the patience to bear with me, and I'll be happy to take questions at the end of it. So this is, of course, this is the IMSBC Code. I have the book here, and it's a 2018 edition, but really not much has changed to where iron ore fines is concerned. The important bit being, for coal, where there will be a new test coming into being on the 1st of Jan 2019. So individual schedules of solid bulk cargoes, essentially their physical properties, precautions to be met while loading and handling these cargoes. The IMSBC Code is mandatory under the Solas Convention, so they have the chapter 6 and 7 reproduced for you. The code of practice for solid bulk for the safe loading and unloading of bulk carriers. The Blue Code is essentially a great document. The names and addresses of the competent authorities. And lastly, it is commended to administrators, ship owners, shippers, masters, and of course the surveyors. A little bit of history. The BC code was replaced by the IMSBC code, adopted in 2008, and we had a series of casualties between 2008 and 2011. While the code was mandatory from 1st of Jan 2011, it has been under constant review. And while they say that change is the only constant, well, here the change is contentious. The changes which came into force on the 1st of Jan 2017, where iron ore fines are concerned, is still being discussed, and in many places the change has not yet been adopted. We will go into that change and how it affects each one of us a little later in this presentation. So a little background of what iron ore is. Iron ore has been there for many years, for many decades, and being carried by ships without any problem. So when did the problem arise? It really came into being when the technology for making steel matured. Earlier, it was the lumps, big stone-like cargo, which really had no risk of liquefaction as such, being carried on ships. Any water used to be drained by the bilges without a problem. And the cargo used to be prepared for shipment essentially by sealing. So all the waste material, the fine powder material, used to be dumped into huge mountain-like dumps. And it was in the late 20th and early 21st century that technology for using this waste material was developed, the sintering technology. This opened up a huge new market, especially with China. It was in 2004 that for iron ore, it was like a mini iron ore shock. The prices went from $20 per ton to $140 per ton, just like that. And a new market emerged for all the dumps. Can you imagine? Something that was just lying there, waste and dumped. It used to be, in fact, called as dumps in India. Had a market for 7 times the price of iron ore. Well, here it was. And the world went crazy. China needed more and more iron ore fines. And without being ready for it, the industry actually made a lot of money. What happened, of course, is that plenty of people, hundreds of people, in fact, lost their lives. Ships were lost and people started waking up to the phenomena called liquefaction. Before this happened, nobody was really paying attention to what may happen. And believe me, gentlemen and any lady that's there online today, that we haven't heard the last of this. And this is still yet to be understood completely. Well, at that time, iron ore looking like this in a hole could turn into something like this was a little difficult to understand. This is in 2009, 10, 11. This is the same hole, same cargo, and people found it a challenge. People still find it challenging, especially the shippers. The relationship between moisture content and the transportable moisture limit was for the first time coming into the fore, and people were making an effort to understand this relationship. So what is the transportable moisture limit? Essentially, this is the definition which exists in the IMSBC Code. It seems very straightforward. Cargo which may liquefy, and this is the maximum amount of moisture which is considered safe. Now, how is it determined? It's determined by the test procedures which are approved by a competent authority. Now, this is interesting, and we will come to this a little later in the presentation. So the test procedures which are approved by a competent authority, right? The test procedures are mentioned in Appendix 2, which is recommendatory, by the way, but they have to be approved by the competent authority. Consider a piece of sponge, and we pour some water into the sponge. And I think most of you will agree that the sponge, if it was dry enough, will absorb the water. Where is the water? It is there in the various porous nature of the sponge. And if you keep pouring water, then a stage will come where the sponge cannot absorb anymore. And you will have water on the table or the floor or wherever you have kept the sponge. Now, can we do the same exercise when we place a small weight on the sponge and start pushing it down? The point I'm making is that the more pressure we put on the sponge, the less water it can hold. This point is important to understand in the context of understanding the nature of TML inside the ship's hold. Where does the pressure in the ship's hold come in from? And if I asked you to imagine a ship's hold like a sponge, look at the cargo and visualize that there is a whole huge sponge sitting there in your cargo hold. Where is the pressure that I'm implying going to come from? And even if you understand that some of the water which is going to be poured inside is going to be locked into the void spaces, we still need to have pressure or energy to act upon to understand the phenomena of TML and the relationship with the moisture content. Let me try and explain that to you a little later in the presentation. To understand TML and to understand and appreciate the change which is going to come into the TML and the new type of test, we need to look at what were the old tests, the existing tests pre-2016. We have the flow table test, the penetration table test, and the Proctor and Fargeberg test methods. Each having its own pros and cons. So this is the flow table test method, and it is by far the most prevalent in the whole world. In India, in fact, 99.9% of the labs only use this method. It's very straightforward. You put the cargo into a mold, put it on top of a flow table, which falls up and down by about 12.5 centimeters. And the movement of this table and the thud it gives you is generating that energy, which is then it gets into the cargo, trying to replicate conditions in the ship's hold. And the maximum water it can hold until it starts to deform is when it has reached its flow state. You reduce 10%, you get your TML. To understand moisture content is fairly simple. You weigh the cargo before, and then you dry it up for maybe 4 to 5 hours and weigh it again. The loss in weight was the moisture content. The penetration table test, essentially it was developed for mainly coal, because the flow table can only handle sizes up to 7 mm. The penetration test can handle sizes up to 25 mm. But really, it had no direct connection to conditions in the ship's hold and was developed to match results of the flow table. And lastly, the Proctor and Fargeberg test, perhaps the only test which was based on real hold densities, experience densities in the hold. However, was found to be inadequate when used for iron ore fines, when compared to that with iron ore concentrates. What is the difference between iron ore fines and concentrates? Where there used to be no difference pre-2016, where mineral ore or iron ore concentrate used to be under the schedule of mineral ores. Of course, they were Group A cargoes which liquefy, Group C cargoes which have no apparent liquefaction danger or any other danger for that matter. But this test was by far the most logical, but it had a size restriction of 5 mm. So definitely out of the 3, if a new test had to be developed, this was the test to be worked upon. Now iron ore fines and coal. The 3 methods, existing methods were being used, and with the code under modification right from 2011, the modified Proctor and Fargeberg test was introduced in 2016 and became mandatory on 1st of Jan 2017. The same test with different sizes, different weights is going to be introduced. It's already there in the code now. It's in the 2018 edition and being used on a voluntary basis. It's going to become mandatory from 2019, 1st of Jan 2019. Was it necessary to develop a new test? Well, with 800 to 1,000 million tons of cargo being transported all around the world, and exceptional delays happening during loading, especially in Brazil and Australia, this change was actually driven by the industry. And they got the P&I clubs on board. They had a Japanese scientist to head this project. And the research they did, well, personally, I'm convinced there are others who are not. It is still contentious because of reasons which we will talk about a little later. But I think that the research was so sound and logical that I think, well, it's there in the code. So as surveyors, as lab operators or chemists, you need to follow the code. I'm convinced that the test is good. So the development of the new test, this was done essentially using a simple principle of bulk density. What happens to the bulk density when cargo is loaded onto a ship? When you're loading iron ore fines with an X percentage of moisture content, you're normally dropping it from 10 to 20 to 25 meters sometimes. And the motion of the particle, the momentum of the cargo being dropped is such that it settles down into the ship's hold quite nicely. In fact, every time it falls into the hold, it is getting a little bit more compacted. What's happening is that the overall volume of the cargo is marginally reducing. We will look at this in the subsequent slides. Now, question, well, this is from me to you and not vice versa, that will come later. I'm going to ask you a question and make you look at a story, and then maybe we will search for answers together. So how many of you in this fest are doing something to control your cholesterol? Well, I am. Well, some of you, I'm sure, like Milind is online. He's a fitness buff, so he jogs and climbs mountains. There are others who do yoga, others who diet. And then people like me, I prefer to just pop a pill, and I keep my cholesterol in a try to keep it between 200 and 250. It has never gone below 200, and normally doesn't go over 250. But what if you got this in your morning post, or you read this on the TV today? It said that cholesterol levels up to 300 are okay, and there's no need to be worried. There's no need to live your life. What would you do? Jump in joyous, change your diet. I have not put beer, but morning to evening beer. Discontinue any medication that you have been taking to control your cholesterol. Refuse it outright, or be cautious and then plan to change your lifestyle, if at all. What would you do if you read this and said that, it's a 10-year study, 300 cholesterol is fine, no problem? Well, don't answer it as yet. It's your life, and the question is to you. And we will try and relate this to what I'm talking about a little later in the presentation. Right. Coming back to cargo, coming back to generation of energy, generation of pressure. Simple exercise, you take any glass and fill it with, say, sand, like this, and then you shake it, vibrate it, or gently bang it on a table, and you will eventually land up with a glass like this, where you will have this space on top, generated by the settling of getting more and more space, but you will generate. And how does this happen, and where is this space come from? Well, the space has come from the cargo itself, where the void spaces are now reduced and the cargo is settled down. Essentially, the volume of cargo has remained the same. So if we put a name to this glass as the load port, and we call the resultant glass as the discharge port, this is what we get. Now, is this logical, or this glass experiment is only an experiment? Well, it is logical, because part of the exercise to develop the new test and to corroborate and validate all the ships, hundreds of ships out of Brazil, out of Australia, and they measured the volume of cargo at the load port and at the discharge port. And you can see significant reductions in the volume when the vessel reached the discharge port. Coming back to the glass. So this is the load port. And having established that, yes, the volume will reduce, this is the discharge port. Knowing what is.
Ruchin, it's Mike. Can I just interrupt briefly? We're getting a bit of distortion on your sound. There's a distortion on your sound. A jack, what was the message? Audio jack had been unplugged. Have you touched any of your kit at all? Anything dropped out, fallen out?
I haven't, but I can unplug and plug it in again just to make sure. Yeah, test Mike. How do you read me now?
No, you're still coming across rather not very clear, Ruchin. I don't know what's suddenly changed.
I haven't changed anything. I still have the internet at full speed.
We just saw something flick up in the corner of the screen saying an audio jack had been unplugged, but I mean that would mean you're physically pulling something out of somewhere. So you haven't found it.
But I'm plugging it out now, and then I'm going to replug it back, and then see what happens now. Okay, so have you got the message that I've unplugged the jack?
No, it's still not clear. Zarir says he can hear Ruchin very well. Let's crack on, Ruchin. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Yep. Is it okay now for most of you? All right. I'm assuming it is. All right. Thanks, Zarir. So load port, discharge port, the water in the cargo remains the same. And considering that we know the volume which has been reduced, I have to put without reaching the discharge port to have a similar condition in a laboratory. Now, earlier, when we had the iron ore included in the mineral concentrates, the pressure required was 350 grams. Now, with the new schedule, we have a significantly lower pressure to be applied for iron ore. Let's have a look at this. What happens when we try to look at it with the context of iron ore in a whole. So this is it. The ship is moving and rolling nicely. It from moving, it is the friction. The friction is keeping the iron ore from going anywhere. Essentially, a balance between friction, pressure, and moisture. So where is the pressure coming from? Well, you have an effective increase in bulk density. Mass upon volume. Mass remains the same. Volume reduces. So you have an effective increase in density. Effective increase in density, resulting pressure. What does the pressure do? It decreases the void. From where is, how is it reducing? Essentially, the void spaces where all the moisture was present is reducing because of the pressure. What's happening to the water which was there in the void spaces is getting pushed out. So the pressure is increasing, moisture remains the same, and it's getting pushed out. It's getting particle to particle, and the friction is reducing. Friction reduces, the ability of cargo to stay together to maintain its integrity reduces considerably. It is at this point, gentlemen, if it is at this point, if your ship is doing a roll, which is then surrounded by water, which was earlier trapped in the void space and now has come on the surface, is going to behave like a marble, and the cargo is going to slide one the other. This is all that there is where liquefaction is concerned. And quite frankly, it was during reading through this research that I, in fact, properly understood how it all happens. We did it practically in the lab. The only way cargo can get liquefied. And if this moment passes, if your ship is moving nicely and going on towards wherever it has to go, the water essentially is going to keep coming up, cargo will cake. So you will still have water on the surface of the cargo, very, very little water, maybe, an inch of, right through the hold. But the cargo inside will be so hard that nothing tiresome affair at the discharge port. So what's going to essentially happen if we allow this to continue? Well, this is what happens if at that stage your ship is doing the roll. To try and put it down into this is your ship's hold, I've tried to color code the three components, that is the cargo, the void space, and the water within the water. Try and create the condition in the ship's hold in the laboratory. This is what it takes, 150 grams. You drop it by 15 centimeters over 5 layers. So you fill one layer, you drop it 15 times, and you do. Then when you measure it, put it in the oven, we get the moisture content. By the virtue of knowing the volume of the container, we reduce the volume of the solid, and we can get the volume of the air and water. And then we plot it. Looks complicated. It is not so complicated though, but we plot it on a graph, and we can get a nice TML with that. Absolutely unbiased. It's not subjective in any way. As long as you follow the process, you will land up with existing experiential data that you have. Moving ahead, reduction in tamping pressure. So that is what it is. Coming back to that sponge where we had discussed the amount of pressure you put, lower the amount of water it can hold. Now the tamping pressure, the pressure on the cargo has been reduced from 350. The cargo can hold more water. You're allowing more water to be held by cargo, by a cargo. And some people call it a dilution of safeties. But that's how it is. It's been established that the cargo is absolutely safe if we do the calculations in this manner. It used to be 350. Well, it's 150 grams now. Increase in TML. Well, we have done enough, so we know we have, I think, and we stick to that 2 to 3% increase in TML. Essentially, cargoes which could not be shipped earlier because, say, the TML was 10 and the moisture content was 11 by 2. So maybe the TML will become 12 or 13 as long as the moisture content remains at 11. And the irony is, with all of this, is it being understood by us? I mean, it has been years that some of parts of this paper have presented to various audiences, and very few people have actually understood what we're talking about. And if you look at the ships and this is a very recent photo in the recently concluded monsoon, and this cargo was to be shipped. And these are people who are going to take samples, to draw samples of this cargo to be shipped. So really, I have no answer. This is again the ships. These are cargo being brought to ships on barges and being rejected. This barge particularly has been brought to the shore because a complaint has been made against the surveyors for rejecting this cargo. No drop in movement. Like I said, 800 to 1,000 million metric tons here. Indian panorama. Well, traders, multiple cargo sources, barges, loading, usually unorganized surveyors. Essentially going through a hard time where the carriage of iron ore fines is concerned. Coming back to the cholesterol dilemma versus the modified Procter and Fargeberg test, how do we relate it? So cholesterol, I think I would stick to my own lifestyle. Maybe I would pop the pills a little less, but I wouldn't go by that research. My life depends on it. Gentlemen, now with the added TML, what does the ship owner do? What does the seafarer do? Their lives depend on it. And I'm not surprised it's going to take some time before people accept that this test is okay. So we have majority of the labs still using the flow table test. And essentially, I personally feel that because disorganized, unorganized, uncontrolled, and most of the times non-existent, there is no standard available for sampling of stationary stockpiles. So can you imagine going to sample a stockpile of 100,000 tons or 150,000 tons and 50 meters in size and 35 meters high? How are you ever going to know what's inside that stockpile? So the greatest safety is in the flow table method and the penetration test method and the old Procter and Fargeberg method used to somehow absorb the all. Hence, the modified Procter and Fargeberg test has got to be very, very carefully used. And I have no answer how people will absorb that information and say, well, this cargo was not safe. I got new test now. It's safe. It's going to be carried by a ship, which You didn't carry this cargo earlier. Well, the choice is yours. The clubs, by the insurance companies. So sooner than later, it's going to become a reality. In India, there is only one lab formally approved for use of the modified Procter & Gamble test, and that is the E.Lab. That's the lab that I head in Goa. So before formalizing use of the modified Procter & Gamble initial, that you put it, you have a dynamic strategy where, where I put up this picture with a constant moisture line. So we take samples, we use bulldozers all around the stockpile, and then at 3 different levels, we see the moisture content, and then logically try and join the line and say, this is the maximum it can go. And if you find this CML, well, the cargo doesn't go there. The experiential data of the lab to corroborate any result they get by the modified by the competent authority. Competent authority is perhaps, I tried to actually get all the pages out from the IMSBC Code where the competent authority was mentioned, and in this book is specified. And essentially, in India is the DG shipping, and this is the definition in the code. But essentially, the competent authority has complete authority on how and what to implement from the IMSBC. With local laws will prevail, incorporating part or complete sections of the code. Overall onus of implementation and form of implementation, approval of shippers, procedures, etc. How much of the code is it going to be followed, and into the implementation is the onus of the competent authority. Well, varying skill sets of competent authority. Can you imagine the competent authority being competent enough to really go through the modified Procter & Gamble test, or to have a set of sampling procedure challenge? Training facilities for the competent authority. Where are the training facilities? Where are they getting trained at? And is there some kind of a syllabus? Do they even have a copy of the code? So these are questions, especially in countries like India, is big business. How do we have the process streamlined when much of the implementation is driven by the competent authority? So as surveyors, our role becomes so much more important, because this has us, and surveyors have to work very closely with the competent authorities and to ensure that whatever comes out is acceptable. In fact, the role of professional institutes like the IIMS is absolutely extremely important. Well, competent authorities these days, their mantra is, we are not the inspectors, we are facilitators. Especially in India, we have the new government whose major thrust is on volumes, trade, and they don't like delays, they don't want inefficiencies. And it's sometimes very, very difficult to convince them that, this cargo just cannot go. And they expect maturity of the trade and self-regulation. Well, self-regulation with added TML, I can think of, these kids playing the way, smiling, I don't know. I haven't found any exceptionally mature shippers in this side of the world, at least. Quickly, just a case. This was 2 years back. These are guys sampling a stockpile, and this was in June. I told the shippers that, look, there's monsoons coming. He said, no, listen, your cargo. Well, they covered the cargo. 1 week of rain, 650 mm of rain. A ship came into port, and they loaded in rain, and this is what the cargo turned out to be. This is when they called me back, and I said, you have to discharge cargo. Luckily, it was only about cargo was discharged. These are the dangers of modified Procter & Gamble test. This cargo wouldn't have got into the hold if we had used the older method. Yes, a poor understanding of the code, definitely, especially by the shippers. And present poor markets for the ship owners are not helping. Because the ship owners want their big operators, and the shippers who COAs they are servicing often now twist the ship owners to appoint surveyors as demanded by the shippers. That's happening all the time. Undermines the complete implementation process. Different interpretations of the English language. Well, substantial quantities, certain promotion, significant rain. How much rain is significant rain? Certain proportion means what? Well, poor understanding of the English language. Yes, some of us do suffer. It's a challenge to try and make these considerations while reading the code. And the role of the surveyor. I think the role of professional institutes today, because if the onus is on the competent authority to lay down approvals for various courses, procedures, and test methods, how do we ensure that the surveyors who are then advising the competent authority are competent enough? Live surveyor's role has to be that of a specialist, must maintain his professional development, must have his equation with the CA. If he wants to contribute to the industry, he has to have an equation. presentations, technical presentations like the ones we have gone through in the last few hours are brought to the notice of these authorities, who will then make them a part of their agenda to implement into their local statutes. We see this all the time. Cannot allow this, actually follow this diligently. The day we have this word called integrity imbibed into us, I think much of our problems will go away. So what is the biggest challenge where I'm concerned with respect to the IMSBC code? The implementation, of course. But why? Because of lack of integrity in various people. So shippers, well, I don't see anything other than targets where shippers are concerned that they are concerned about. The competent authority, as per my knowledge, labs, surveyors, we have got to just look at this one word, integrity. Gentlemen, I hope I have given you a little food for thought, and I'm open to taking questions. Mike, I hope you can hear me now, and I'm ready for any questions which you guys may have.
We can hear you, Ruchin, just a little bit grainy at this end, but can I just take this opportunity to thank you personally for an excellent, as I know, you know your subject inside out and backwards. And I'm just invite other people now to ask any questions. Anybody have any questions for Ruchin?
Ruchin, if nobody else is asking, can I ask you a question, please?
Yes, please go ahead, Zarir.
Ruchin, I know in Indonesia it is extremely difficult for a surveyor to go out with his head held high and take samples of the stockpile. Although there have been stories about threats and somebody from the shipper side watching, kind of restriction or some kind of leash-bound surveyors that you come across in Goa for sampling? And if so, do you think there is a solution of this market?
All right, thanks for the very relevant question, Zarir, and good that you brought it up. Well, there are two things. One is in 2016, that the shippers have to allow the owners' representatives to give access to their stockpiles for sampling. So that was one. So it was already mandatory for shippers to give access. Now, having that being said, Goa had people from the shipper side looking on. We didn't have much interference from them, and we used to sample and give samples to everybody. But the ports on the East Coast is a completely different ball game. And as recently as last month, where we were appointed by a major club by the UK PNI, and the stevedores who were also agents for the shippers completely stopped us from entering the port. In fact, they threatened our guys. Our guys had to take a cab in the middle of the night and leave from Paradip. And this was not the first we were appointed by the American club. And this was also in Paradip. And the same thing took place. Well, we have gone and approached Paradip Port Trust, and they have in fact given me a circular saying that they have done away. They have to come in and get into the port. However, the passes are to be arranged by the agent. And what you say is, I don't see a silver lining anywhere, because this is, when I went back to the shippers, I in fact went to Bombay, I visited their head offices. Some of the surveyors have got a connection with the agents, and they will not allow any other service. Nothing to do with you coming from Goa, but this is how it is. So I don't see how we are going to solve this, and it's a completely improving anytime soon. I don't see myself now sending my guys out, especially if the same agents are involved. Does that help, Zarir?
Yes, definitely. This is somehow I had a ear on a similar story. I'm glad that you specified it absolutely with examples. The question is, what can be done, and how can one protect our fraternity from being either overpressured and still do an honest job? I don't see how, because the idea of asking this question was to seek a solution for it.
Zarir, just to make you a little comfortable, in 2016, I have given a written complaint to DG Shipping, to MMD Paradip, after getting pushed by DG, that the Paradip Port Trust brought out that circular saying that we're doing away with this licensing business and anybody can come and sample it. And this time around too, I have approached, and they say, look, this is a law and order situation. This is nothing to do with shipping anymore, because we have done, when you came to us last time, the port is saying you're more than welcome. And now if you're going to ask me to come and, to stand outside your hotel so that nobody comes in and troubles you, somehow how, as a fraternity, we can help others who are going to go through the same thing, unless a law and order. And I feel very embarrassed. I mean, I'm sitting here in India, I'm talking about a port in India. Unfortunately, it is like that. And how it's going to be in thing, and rest assured that I am talking to DG Shipping on this at every opportunity that I get. I'll be happy to get more ideas from any of you guys.
No, thanks, Ruchin. I heard from Irawan in Indonesia, a similar story where surveyors, to the extent, are held at gunpoints and things like that. And even hands and legs broken if they give out a report which is against the particular shipper in terms of moisture being over the limit, etc., because it's a direct, a little worse there. But that was when Irawan was active in the IMS folds. But I then started benchmarking it, and I got stories about the Indian coastline. So I just wanted to have a mention on this. I think you're right. But do you think it is something from an advisory note to our members at least to say that this is what is happening? So if you are approached by a curious person, there could be this number, that number, or this helpline that you can call. Just something that can help our membership base a little. We can't stop it, and we are not somebody who can police anything. But at least we can make it a little easier on our members, at least within the course.
Yeah, it's food for thought. It's food for thought, and let's work on this, Zarir. I'm very keen. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ruchin. That's at least some outcome. Look, if there is a problem and can't be rectified, at least we can caution our fraternity towards it, so that or maybe refuse to take up such jobs.
Yeah, I completely agree, Zarir. Completely agree. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zarir. And once again, my thanks to you, Ruchin. Thought-provoking stuff, and as you say, food for thought. So my thanks to you for contributing to the fest. And we'll be back online. I haven't seen Karen Bain, our next presenter.